Welcome to the BLTNT Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Loria, serving up real stories of business, life, technology, and transformations. You'll hear from interesting people about big changes from career shifts to life-altering decisions and the innovations that help make it all happen. It's about sharing those light bulb moments, pivot points, challenges overcome, and the journeys that inspire us to think differently. If you're on the lookout for insights to propel you forward, stories that resonate, or just a bit of inspiration on your next BLTNT move, you're in the right place. Let's dig in. Welcome back to an in-studio version of the BLTNT Podcast with a very special guest, our new background. Actually, this is the first episode we're shooting with the new background. Thank you to our team here, including Jackie, who made this all come together. So thank you for beautifying our studio here. And thank you to our guest here, Ron Thomas, for our episode that we're calling Bike Rides to Building.
All right. Thanks for having me here on this episode of Between One Fern. I appreciate it.
We are very happy to say that Ron is the first person who noticed our ode to Between Two Ferns with our plant here behind us. I don't know if you can see it in the camera shot or not, but we've been waiting for somebody to pick up on that and make reference. So thank you for catching that.
My pleasure.
Zach Galifianakis, thank you very much. We appreciate your
inspiration.
Inspiration, yes. So Ron is here all the way from Wyandotte, Michigan, where he has been beautifying that great city. But we also have something else exciting today, is that Ron is the first person to bring an in-studio guest. His wife, Sam, is here with us, along with Jackie. So if you hear any of what you would normally perceive as the canned laughter or applause, notice that today it's the real deal with Sam and Jackie here.
But if you feel scorn in the ambiance, just know that that's synthetic and added in it.
Absolutely. If there's any scowling or anything like that, we're going to ignore that. So I know Ron through a business peer group that we belong to, but Ron's a father, husband, pilot, bike rider, entrepreneur, real estate mogul who's revitalizing the city of Wyandotte. That's his newest claim to fame. But would love to hear your story. Want to share this with folks because you really made a very interesting transition. And at the BLTNT Podcast, we talk about business, life, technology, and transformations. And we love transformations. So I don't think we've seen one as wild as guy who flips upside down on bikes to guy who revitalizes a city.
That all feels generous. I'm excited to talk about it. Yeah, absolutely. It's been a fun ride, certainly.
Great. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your story? I think we should start off with how you met Sam, of course.
At a skate park. She
Okay.
was 14. I was 19. We were friends for years and started dating. Many years after that, and been pretty much best friends along the way. So
great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks, Sam, for driving him here. I know he was drinking a little bit this morning in preparation of this, so we needed him to be brought safely over here.
Yeah, much appreciated, and thanks for the cocktails along the way.
So tell us about this journey. So let's talk about this business career here of you went from bike riding to building. Yep. And you've told me the story, and I've been so excited to share this because I just think it's remarkable, your kind of tenacity and the things that you saw at a really young age of, what you wanted, what you didn't want. And so
okay.
Will you share us your story?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And then thanks for all the complimenting comments and observations there. I kind of had two ambitions when I was a kid. One was born of time, but I really enjoyed bike riding. I picked it up when I was maybe 11 years old, and then throughout high school, I wanted to be a professional bike rider. That was my thing. And I grew up in a family with nobody went to college. There's no business background. There's nothing like that. My dad fixed glass in cars, and my mom worked at the post office, and so we didn't have much. And as I became an adult, I came also to the realization that I would like to do something that puts me on financial better footing in my life. Turns out that's in direct conflict with riding bikes for a living, but I was too young and dumb to know that. So I just pursued this idea of I want to go be a professional bike rider. And so right out of high school, I dropped out of college. I had a scholarship, and I gave that up so I could go pursue a career in bike riding. And after a year or two, I was making $7,000 the first year and then $14,000 the second year gross annually, right? So nothing. And I had the realization that I needed to maybe pursue a different path, or at least broaden my horizons of what riding bikes for a living could be if I was going to, not be poor. And so what that looked like for me was self-education. I dropped out of college because I wanted to go pursue this dream of riding bikes, but it wasn't because I didn't want to educate myself. So eventually I found my way back to university. But when I would be traveling, between events year round, I'd be in the backseat of a Suburban, and there'd be three of us guys, and we'd be going and doing these performances. And they'd read like bike riding magazines, and they'd make fun of me because I bought, and I told you this beforehand, but I'll never forget it, Mutual Funds for Dummies, right? I'm like, I don't know anything about money, but maybe this is a good place to start. And so I'd read that in the back, and then they would just make fun of me for it. And ironically, they came to work for my companies over time once I continued educating myself and they kept riding bikes. But yeah,
they didn't think you were a dummy anymore, huh?
Yeah, that might be generous. Also,
Okay.
they
Still
do sometimes, and they're well founded in that idea. But hey,
That's great. So, in the bike riding, though, walk us through the kind of your career there. I mean, you turned it into a business that you then exited, which kind of gave you the footing to get kind of the foundation of where you're starting into today.
Right before the recession in '08, so 2006 or 7 is when I started my first business. I saved up $13,000 by riding bikes for a living, and then during the off season I worked as a plumbing repair person, and I just put away everything I could. So I had 13 grand, and I always liked building things, even back in high school. And I thought, at that point I was intrigued by real estate. I was like, I would like to flip a house, or maybe I can start a business that produces the events I was performing in. And at the time, and I studied economics later on in college, but before that, I just looked at things. I said, okay, back then the prevailing thought was that real estate always goes up in value, and it was going up 10% a year at the time, houses, right? And I thought to myself, well, if wages go up 2% per year on average, and houses go up 10, then in about 5 years, no one can afford a house anymore. This doesn't make sense. I'm scared of it. So I instead invested that $13,000 I had to start my event business. Thankfully, because a couple years later, the entire real estate economy collapsed. But that was how I got started. I made that choice then, and I kind of pursued the bike riding for a while, always knowing that eventually I wanted to make the jump into real estate on a full-time basis. But in the near term at the time, I thought bike riding events was more attainable.
But it was done on that napkin math of the 2% versus the 10%, and I feel like this is going to be a losing gig somewhere along the way.
Yeah, that's like that dog don't hunt, and I didn't know why yet, but I was like, there's just something there that doesn't work.
So you figured it out before. Who's the guy in the movie that
The Big Short?
The Big Short.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were the Big Short.
I wish I would have been in his shoes.
Right.
I think he figured out a little better than I did.
But so the company. Talk about what the company did.
Yeah. So Rise Above Entertainment is technically the name of the company. It's now Rise Above Ventures. It's a DBA. But what I did. The way that company earned revenue was I would put on marketing events. So when I was a traveling performer, we had these big, heavy ramps, and there were three of us, and we would set up the equipment, and then we would also do the performances, right? We were the guys that would do the backflips on bikes and also set up everything. And the equipment was just very inefficient. Lugging it around was terrible. Most of our events were in schools, so you had to take this equipment through like single doors in and out of gyms. And it was just a pain. And with a background in like metal fabrication from high school, I thought, I could design better equipment that would make our jobs a lot easier. So I approached the boss at the time, the guy that I was touring for, and I said, hey, give me a budget of a few $1,000 and I'll design and build this new equipment that'll make things way better. And he either thought I couldn't or didn't want to or whatever. So that $13,000 that I saved up, that's what I did. I designed and built new equipment that was much more efficient and made the performances easier, and it was easier on the performers themselves
Because they could put it together, take it apart.
Yeah,
easier. It was lighter.
Rather than a bunch of pieces you carry around, these were just equipment that would fold up on racks. Picture a bicycle ramp that's like the size of an F-150 that you can fold up and fit through a single doorway, and it takes 5 minutes, right? Rather than an hour of lugging around pieces. So that was kind of how it started. I designed, built this equipment, called some customers that I knew worked for the hired the business I used to work for. And they had liked me personally. We got to know each other. So then, I sold a week worth of events for like $10,000 gross, and so began my first business.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Do you still have those ramps in the backyard?
I think I have one left rotting away in some piece of land I have somewhere now. But
Okay.
my former partner. So eventually, where We did at our peak. We were doing almost 1,000 events a year, and that's a few teams traveling, doing multiple events a day. Fundraising companies at schools were our biggest customers, but we weren't really making any money. And I always thought of it as once we had enough of a platform, if you will, I might have been able to adapt it for some marketing use. And so this is where that business actually took off for a while and did well. I partnered with a guy that sold traditional sports marketing for the Pistons, and we approached, well, the National Guard approached him, and then he came to me and said, hey, let's develop a program for them. So I researched everything that they needed in terms of marketing. It's basically soft recruiting, and came up with a program that they found value in. And we ended up getting sponsored by National Guard and the Army to do events where they paid for the whole tour, like all around the country.
Talk about soft recruiting. What is soft recruiting all about?
Soft recruiting is basically going inside of, in our instance, we would go into high schools with National Guard branding everywhere, and we would produce these events that basically painted National Guard military service in a positive light. So it's not a, hey, go sign up for the military, but it's like positive PR. Most military branches have, like by statute, the right to go into public high schools at least, or even the obligation a couple times a year.
Okay.
And so they would use that as, use us as an opportunity for FaceTime, more or less. But that was where we actually, started to make a good living. We were able to charge a lot more because of government contracting. We can talk about that, but I have mixed opinions on it. But in any case, that was the nature of how things worked for us. So for a few years, we were producing these events, making good money doing it, and the second I earned anything from that, I just left my lifestyle the exact same as it was. I mean, my mortgage payment at the time was like $300, and we just invested all of it in investment real estate. And that was how we really that's how I began the transition.
And what were the
into real
first?
estate.
What was your first start into investment real estate? Was it single family homes?
Yeah, I eventually went to Penn State in Pennsylvania because it was close to an action sports camp where I was, training and recruiting bike riders, that kind of stuff. But we had, during a summer off, my now wife and I came home to wind out where I'm from. This was 2010, so after the recession. Bought a foreclosed house for $35,000, put another 30 or so into it, which was our combined life savings at that point. And then at the end of the summer, we thought, well, our intention was to rent it, and I was going to go back to Penn State and finish. But we owned the house free and clear. All our friends and family were there. We wanted to continue in real estate. So we ended up moving into that house and then wash, rinse, repeat as much as we could with single-family houses for the first 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And was that your only job at the time, or did you have to take on other work while you were doing that as well?
No, I was running the event business.
Oh, you still were? Okay.
Yeah, so the event business I ran or was affiliated with right until the beginning of COVID.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were some turbulent times. I started to make the transition into real estate full-time in maybe 2016 or 17.
Okay.
But yeah, I had that for about 15 years.
Okay. And then when did you get this vision of, when did it morph from single family to, hey, we know you in our group of friends. We know you as the guy who's revitalizing Wyandotte, right?
Sure. So when did it, from single family to commercial real estate?
Yeah, when did you make that transition?
I had I did what's called a portfolio loan. So I had 3 rental properties, single family houses, and I went to a bank and I said, hey, can I get a mortgage against these so that I can get some cash back and go do this again? And my mortgage banker there, his name's Dave, he recommended a book, and it's a little cheesy, but it has a really good explanation of how commercial real estate finance works. And it was called Multifamily Millions. It's by a guy named Dave Lindahl. So I read it, and that was kind of an epiphany, because then I understood. I started to understand how if you can adjust or change or add value through creating cash flows in real estate or in business, then you can dramatically change the outcomes. That's not true for single-family houses. Single-family houses and the finance around them are really governed by government subsidy, and what I mean by that is the 30-year fixed mortgage, because those are packaged up and then regulated by the government and sold to Wall Street. So nobody looks at renting single-family houses in mass as the commercial finance just works differently, I guess. I'm doing a bad job of explaining it. Single-family houses are all valued based on what the next owner-occupant will pay for it. So if you adjust the underlying financials, it doesn't really affect the valuation. Whereas in commercial, you're buying something only because of its income potential. And so the buyers and sellers of that pay for that income potential. And if so, once you learn how to basically make that work better or make something make more income, then the value goes up a lot.
So would it make sense to share that spreadsheet for
sure,
people to see?
Sure.
So we'll put it up on the screen here. Ron had shared with me a basic example of commercial real estate finance and what that, how a small tweak in adding value in terms of rent.
Yeah.
Right? So this example is just $100 difference in rent per unit. In a commercial building. What that can do, and so then this makes it real easy for us to see that $100 makes an enormous difference, and really is what gives you the guiding principles of how much could I invest in fixing this place up.
Yes. This is just a fictitious example I came up with, but this is exactly how it works. If you look at scenario A and scenario B, the only difference is the rent per month, and I raised it $100. So this is a fictitious 30-unit apartment building. Let's say you buy it and rents $1,000 a month, and you don't do anything except for say, okay, well, I think market rent is really $1,100 here, so you raise rent by $100 per unit. It all works out to a bottom line of a value increase, an equity increase of $483,000, given these inputs. But these inputs are reasonable assumptions for an asset like this. So this is a lot of big apartment building investors. This is basically the game they play.
Okay.
I do something similar, except for I don't usually just buy something and do nothing with it and increase rents. Rather, I'll find a property that's like completely vacant or dilapidated, and then come up with some new financial highest and best use, and then build it out.
So, for example, the most recent property that you're working on is a former vacant school building.
Yes.
That's being completely converted into 30 single-family dwellings. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, and that's a larger deal for me, but more typical of the type of deal I do. But what this is I actually went to elementary school here for a few years, but it's a 59,000 square foot beautiful masonry building that's been vacant for 15 years, and it's on 4 acres, and it's walking distance to downtown Wyandotte. I bought that for $1, which seems crazy, but the dynamic the city faced was pay $2 million to knock it down and sell the land for a fraction of that, or pay nothing and then have somebody develop it. So I was able to figure out basically the financial capital stack, put together the money to make it make sense, to buy that, turn it into 30 residential units with 5 houses behind it, and then there's a playground that we're just going to deed to the city as a permanent public park. But that was ultimately the deal I put together, and we're actually starting on it this week.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Great. And you said on a deal like that, there's also some other tax incentives for doing that we're probably getting into commercial real estate 4.0 here, where we started off.
Yeah, that's
or the 400 level class, I should say.
If this is if this is the entry level class, then the brownfield tax credits and that kind of thing is kind of like the doctorate course.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a deal like that, like the school building. The cost to reconstruct it probably exceeds or at least equals the value of what it will be worth when it's done. So no developer would do that. Why spend 2 years and however many millions of dollars to do a renovation only to earn nothing in the end? Mm-hmm. So that's when certain kinds of tax incentives and different kinds of financing that you can typically get, or at least sometimes get, make things viable where they otherwise wouldn't be. And that's the kind of stuff I do sometimes, yeah.
And what does your business enterprise look like today in terms of, what are you owning? What are you renting? How many employees do you have? What does that all look like?
We have about 15 full-time in-house employees, about as many full-time subcontractors that are on our projects pretty much day in, day out. And then some of our properties, the larger ones, have like specific staff to them. Like I'm part owner of a marina that is like 100,000 square foot of buildings, 500 boat slips, a restaurant, and some stuff. And so there's 120 people or so that probably work there full time, most of which I don't oversee because most of them are restaurant employees, and I have a partner that does that.
Okay.
But yeah, I have a group of 20 to 30 on any given day that are full time on our properties or projects doing something.
Great.
Yeah.
And what did you learn from the days of bike riding and managing that group to what you're doing today?
I don't know how much of it is appropriate to say here in a public forum. No,
this is podcast, so you can say or do whatever you want.
They don't smoke weed during the day as much as they did in the bike riding era, but some of them still do, and you tolerate as much as you need to, I suppose. No, but and I was hoping you'd ask a question like this because there was so much that I learned in terms of I don't know, business discipline and work ethic and all these. Like when I was in bike riding, I mentioned I lived near a camp in Pennsylvania. It's called Woodward Camp, and this is a place where all the top guys in the world for bike riding go to train. So like basically everybody who won the X Games, or what was called the Do Tour back when, for a period of 15 or 20 years from all over the world went to this place in the middle of Pennsylvania to train, and that's where I lived. And so some of my ex-roommates were X Games gold medalists. All of my friends were. I wasn't that good, but I was trying. But in watching that, you'll learn so much about risk and risk mitigation. About just work ethic, persistence, all these things that directly apply to business in a way that I didn't realize at the time, but I really appreciate now. And when you wake up every day and you go to work in your job, you might break your arm or come home missing teeth, as has happened to me before. It kind of gives you a different risk perspective than when you go to the office and it's like, okay, maybe the stock market's down or maybe I overspent on this project, but at least I still got my teeth in my mouth when I go home today,
So everything in business that you see today feels like less of a risk than what you did flying upside down through the air.
Less of an immediate risk in the moment. Sure,
Okay.
sure, yeah. I mean, what I do now is certainly more stressful and I think more difficult, but you get pretty well seasoned if you go through action sports and probably all athletics and manage to survive it with your head on your shoulders to go transition that into business.
Would you say some of there's a coolness and a calmness to you too? Would you say that translate? And I'm going to talk to you about being a pilot, but
Okay.
Because you are a pilot, you have your own plane.
Yes.
And how did what you learned through bike riding translate into being a pilot?
I don't think that panic serves anybody well in athletics or in business if they're a business leader, and certainly not in aviation. So I think that skill translates. I mean, and I did learn that early on, I guess. If something's going wrong, you're in the air, you're upside down on a bike or whatever, you're just, it's almost instinctual after you've practiced enough to do what you can to try to survive. And I think just being calm and collected and thinking through the next steps, even if they're coming at you fast, is useful in all three of those things: bike riding, aviation, and business. But a lot of that, does translate. I also think that bike riding, business, a lot of times, and aviation, a lot of times, are things that command all of your attention and focus. You can't be doing one of those things and mind's elsewhere, or you're doing it pretty poorly and it's pretty dangerous. And I think that's true in business too. And then
You're not listening to a podcast flying upside down through the air and on your bike.
I played the fifth. Maybe the plane part. I put on
Maybe the
autopilot.
plane. Okay.
Yeah. No, and another comparison between the two, and this isn't so much for bike riding, but certainly for business and for aviation, is like instrument flight. Instrument flight is if you're in conditions where you can't see like clouds and stuff. You're flying entirely just based on your instrumentation in the plane. I think the businesses that are well run do that just like as a virtue. It's you build your KPIs, you have your metrics, you have your indicators, and they're unique to each business, but they tell you what you need to know to make sure you stay on course.
That was one of the most interesting things you told me the other day that really stuck with me, was when you were talking about a friend of yours who runs a really successful business from very far away, and you said, how do you do it? And he gave you that line and said,
yeah.
It's like instrument rating.
Yep.
Right?
And he was
you run by the gauges.
And he was the guy that got an inspiration of mine anyway to get into aviation, and he was a commercial airline pilot before getting into what he does now. And he made the comparison back before I was instrument rated, before I really understood it. I mean, I got it, but it's 100% true.
So we do have to talk about the story of leveraging that instrument rating when you had a little bit of an icing problem. So we'll talk about a few of the fun and not so fun things that have happened as a pilot. So tell us about that. We'll show some of those pictures too.
Sure. And if any of that synthetic scoring I was talking about pops up now, it's probably because my wife was with me in the plane that day and didn't love it. But
wasn't sure she was coming out of it.
Yeah.
Jackie, can you pull some of those pictures up while he's talking?
We went to Vermont. I think it was Vermont last fall to check out the leaves changing colors, right? And it's beautiful up there that time of year. But we were coming home one night. I think it was a Sunday night, but it was nighttime, and it was instrument conditions, which means it's cloudy. You can't see it as night. And icing. Most people that aren't pilots wouldn't know this, but icing only happens if you're right around freezing and you're in the clouds. Right? You have to have visible moisture and freezing temperatures. So as we're taking off in the mountains at night, and this is my first time really experiencing icing. all of a sudden, we start taking on icing pretty heavy. And I ended up taking a picture of it, which I sent to you here. But it was such that, like, out the front window of the plane, I had a square that was like this big, and that's all you could see. And when you're learning how to fly, at least at my level, and I'm not the most experienced pilot, you don't go out and practice in this stuff, right? You do it in simulators. It's all explained to you. You know how the equipment works. You test it before you fly every time. All that. But at some point, it has to be your first experience in a situation like this, and
Sure.
that was mine for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's sweaty palms, but it's like we talked about already, like just being calm, paying attention, trusting your instruments, knowing what you're doing, or at least as much as you can.
Did you phone a friend or anything while you were up there?
There's no service up there.
But there was no service?
Yeah.
And what about air traffic? Anybody to talk to while you're dealing with that?
Yeah. We were definitely talking to air traffic, and if you end up in a problem, they'll guide you out of it, at least as much as they can. But yeah.
Wow.
I'm sure Sam was my wife writing emails to her mom, telling her, hey, if something happens, here's where the keys to everything is, or whatever.
She's not saying anything.
Yeah.
So
she's still mad.
You said you had a couple of funny stories though. So we were up at an event in northern Michigan that you had flown to.
Yes.
And you took a few people back, and there was an incident that you were telling me about. We won't name any names.
Okay. I understand you have a light stomach from what you were saying also.
When it comes to picking up dog poop or brushing my teeth, I've got
Yes.
a pretty bad gag reflex.
So I once had a bird take a dump on a bumper of my car, and I went to wipe it off with a piece of paper, and it kind of smeared, and I threw up. Right, like I do not have a good stomach for this kind of stuff. So I was flying home with a certain individual who shall not be named. I was giving him a ride home. I flew up by myself to some event, and I was going home. And he lives in Canton, Michigan, and there's a small airport there.
Okay.
So I said, I'll give you a ride. And he's a big guy, and if you're a big enough guy, it's difficult to get in the front seat of my plane.
Okay.
So he sat in the back, and I sat in the front. It was only the two of us. And in my plane, it circulates air, so there's not a direct vent to the outside.
Okay.
So if an aroma happens, it's there for a little while. So this guy at the event, he had a lot of drinks and I believe brisket from the night before. I remember what it smelled like. I think that's what it was. And we're getting about 15 minutes from landing at Canton to drop him off, and it's a pretty turbulent flight. And he tells me he's going to throw up, and that happens sometimes. So I there's a bag, and I give him this bag. It's a paper bag, and a big guy, like I said, he couldn't sit in the front seat. He goes, throws up, but the bag blows it out, right? And I mean, he has like a couple cups full of vomit all over him, covered, right? And like I said, I have a light stomach, and air circulated in the plane, so I'm up at the front, and you know how if something smells bad enough, it's like the air's thick.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
Yeah.
I'm breathing through my mouth, because if I breathe through my nose, I'm gonna have the same fate, right? So I'm here in this turbulent flight. He's in the back, throwing up all over himself. I'm like about to do the same, trying to breathe through my mouth just to get this thing landed. Finally, we get into this airport, and we land, and he didn't have spare clothes with him. Right, I don't know why. We were at this convention for a couple of days, but for whatever reason, so he has to get out of the plane covered and stripped down to his boxers, right? And calls his wife. His wife has to stop at wherever she stopped at to buy him clothes on the way. So he's there for a good half hour, covered in vomit, cleaning my plane on the runway with like in his boxers.
Oh no!
And I wasn't going to clean up any of that. I mean, I'm all for helping a friend, but I think he put himself in his own situation a little bit there. So graciously, he did a good job of cleaning it up. I have some funny pictures of him on the runway in his underwear, and I guess there's just one more instance where keeping a calm head helps.
Good job. And you were able to breathe through your mouth. Normally, they say when you're trying to calm down, breathe in through your nose. This is one of those instances
Yes.
where this is where we calmly breathe through our mouth.
Yes. It would have been a bad scenario if I went down the same path he did and still had to figure out how to land the thing.
Yeah, my vomit story doesn't really hold a candle to that. I had a little nephew throw up in my car when it was about 10 hours old.
Okay.
My car was 10 hours old, and
Okay.
he was about 6, and he let loose in that, and it was kind of funny, but nowhere near what you've got going on.
Well, you probably had to clean that yourself then, huh?
I actually did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. We were leaving where we ski, and all of a sudden I look back, and I said, "You okay?" He says, "I don't feel so good." And my wife turns around, and she leans back, and she all of a sudden her face widens up. She grabs his hat off of his head because he starts barfing.
Oh,
Went everywhere, but where it went in every crevice.
Oh yeah.
It went right down the back of where the pocket is in the back of the seat. It went through every crack on the door. I was cleaning that car.
And it lingers, right?
It lingers.
Yep.
It stays there for a while, and it is no fun. But vinegar is a good odor reducer. So I'll be an advocate for vinegar.
Okay.
The natural
Okay,
natural
keep
odor
someone
eliminator. That's great. So you've been quite a bootstrapper in all of this. One of the things I asked you early on was, well, did you take these risks? Because when you were a kid, you could always just move back home, or a parent would bail you out. And you said, no, I didn't really have the bailout.
Yeah.
So you've never really had the safety net per se of any sort of financial backing or anything like that really felt that comfort. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay. That there is a certain comfort that comes from the idea of having nothing to lose. I think it's you try to in business play to your strengths, and for young entrepreneurs or people just getting started, a strength is having nothing sometimes if you treat it that way, because you can have a big miss, and where are you today? Well, you're where you were yesterday. So that doesn't so I operated on that principle, especially getting started. But you're right, I didn't have really financial backing at all when I was younger. I don't come from money or whatever. For me, it was learn the banking world, right? Figure out how finance works, and then go and actually meet the criteria to get funding at some point. And it was very much just our first house that my wife and I bought, and our first handful of investments were like this, but we spent all of our times, nights, evenings, weekends, she would do the drywall and I would do the plumbing. And that was kind of how it began. And once we began to build up equity, we could then go, use that as a bit of a safety net. Mm-hmm. But we just wash, rinse, and repeat, and really just self-funded from the outset. Her and I together at the beginning, and then once my event business started doing good, it gave us basically more funding to continue to grow it. And these days she's involved with the business, but it's like separate. She does real estate brokerage as like a division of what we do. It's like a small business of her own, and then all the development stuff is on me now.
Okay. Yeah. How do you translate that, though, to today, where you do have a lot to lose?
Yeah.
And so how do you keep the hungry mindset, balance all that risk, to take on these big projects where, you could lose a big chunk of your of your fortune. Maybe you couldn't go broke from them. I'm not sure. I mean, are any of these, totally balls to the wall where you could go broke on a transaction?
I don't know if I could go broke on a transaction, like a singular one, but I will say that anybody who thinks that they're, on top of the world and making tons of money, like, the world changes, right? I don't think there's any such thing as a business proposition without risk. I am fortunate in that I have business partners and some mentors now that, if I need something, I can go to them to some reasonable extent. So I have some safety net in that regard. Plus, I have my own, wealth that we've built up at this point that I can go to if I need sometimes. But I'm a big fan of Jay-Z, and I'm just reminded by your question of him talking about in a lot of his songs, just that being wealthier is not easier. It's actually harder, which is like out of favor to say in front of most people, I think.
Sure.
But there's a reason few people really make that transition in life. And I don't think it's for everybody. And I think life is harder and more stressful now, and sometimes less fun, but on net, more worthwhile and more well suited to me. But if maybe some people experience easy street as business success comes their way, for me, at least at this stage, it's been a grind, and it still is.
You've earned every dollar.
It certainly feels that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've had some layups along the way?
Oh yeah, I've hit some home runs. Absolutely. Yeah. And
where
I've
they maybe came easier than what you expected, or
yeah. My profession is so affected by macroeconomics that like the last couple of years have been harder because interest rates have been high, because it's a very capital intensive industry.
Sure.
So that tends to squeeze things, and it's never the world changed today, stock market's down 50 or whatever. Like, it's not like that for us in real estate. But with time, those kinds of things have a big impact. So like now is harder. Like 10 years ago in real estate, you just couldn't go wrong. Go buy something, sell it a year later, you're going to make a fortune. But now you got to be more careful. Like a lot of to buy and sell properties now in a profitable way without substantial renovation is, from what I'm seeing, pretty difficult. Lending's pretty tight. Capital sources are kind of hard to come by. All that so that's why a lot of times we do projects with like creative tax financing and all of these things, because it's the only way I can see to make it work sometimes. You know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. This episode of the BLTNT Podcast is sponsored by Auxium, business IT and cybersecurity designed to outsmart chaos. Empowered by Juniper Networks. Automate your network with Juniper Networks and the Mist AI platform, the world's first AI-driven wired and wireless network. Do you have a reason behind the name of Rise Above?
Yeah. Actually, I have a tattoo that I got when I was 18 that says Rise Above on it. But there's a famous bike rider named Matt Hoffman, one of the most famous BMX riders ever. And he had a slogan for ad campaign that he ran when I was a kid that I remember, and it was just Rise Above. And he was known for going, higher than anybody. And I just always liked it. It always resonated with me. So when I started my event company, I called it Rise Above Entertainment, inspired by that. And I just kind of kept the name, modified it to the new line of work.
Nice. And do you institute, does any of that kind of trickle down into any cultural or core beliefs of, what you've instituted in the company or even just in your life in general, where you go, like I got to look back and go, okay, rise above, baby, like.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I like the slogan from the outset. It's, I think that we're defined by what we do in moments of challenge, right? And that's like, you'll go through transitions in life, and often they're because something happened that you weren't expecting or some kind of challenge. And how you react in those moments are ultimately what defines what the future looks like. Years down the road, everybody might see success or they might see failure based on what you do. But it's the moment that nobody sees where you're like, okay, what am I going to do here that really determines, I think, our outcomes. And the words Rise Above, I think, is just a real good fallback to go, okay, what am I going to do now? I'm going to figure out the best solution for it. I'm going to rise above whatever the challenge is, and I'm going to proceed.
Great.
Yeah, and I don't know if I've ever said it succinctly like that to everybody at the company.
Well, now we got it recorded.
Yeah,
so we're good.
But I definitely think it fits the character of how we operate and everything we do. Yeah.
Great. And now looking, even though you say you haven't articulated that the same way, do you think that the team sees that in you?
Yeah, absolutely. And we expect it of them, right? It's I am big on company culture. And culture isn't something like, it's not a policy that you share and say everybody follow this. Instead, it starts with really me, and then everybody else that's now been around for a long time. And it is the attitude that we exude. It's how we carry ourselves. It's how we, approach any given situation. And that if you're not on board with that in our company, then you shouldn't be at our company.
Yeah. Great. What else do you want to talk about? How about Fern?
Talk about Fern. I have a picture of her on my phone. Fern's my daughter. So I guess we really are between two Ferns.
We are. Yeah, if she's on that side.
Yeah. My daughter.
But as Sam pointed out, this is not a fern.
Well,
but to us it is.
Well, yeah, she'll get you on a technicality a bit later. No, so yeah, I have a daughter. She turned 2 in June. I was a somewhat reluctant, pretty terrified non-father going into fatherhood. Sam's an excellent mother, and I knew she would be, and she wanted to have kids. So we did, but it was a treacherous transition for me because I didn't know what to expect, and I'm big on freedom, personal autonomy, all that kind of stuff, and I was afraid it might be an impediment on that. But now 2 years on, I can say she's my favorite part of my life, and it surprises me how true it is when I say that. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
How many hours does she have under her belt in junior flight training?
Maybe 200. Yeah. So I got my first pilot's license before instrument rating in October of 2022, and rented the plane from the school like the next week, and flew with her and my wife we stopped in New York and then down to Florida for a wedding. And so I have I went, then it was like her 4-month birthday, right? So I have some pictures of her, like in the cockpit or on my lap with the headphones on when she was 4 months old.
That's great. We'll have to show that.
Yeah.
That.
There's another thing. So recently we're coming home from Grand Haven, so across the state of Michigan, and she's in the passenger seat. And now she's, to the age where she's mimicking us, right? So she's touching my buttons and all this stuff. And she grabs the ailerons, which is the controls, and even though it's on autopilot, the plane will move. So she doesn't really realize what's going on. But she grabs the fuel mixture, And that's the one button you don't, because you pull that to nothing. That's how you turn the plane off, right?
Oh, okay.
And it'll happen to this guy too. So she guys are like, no. All right, friend, we need to calm down with all this touching
Got to
buttons
show some
and
limits
stuff.
here.
Yeah.
For a guy who's into freedom, you're like, we've got some limits here.
Yes.
That's great. That's great. And where did the name Fern come from?
My wife came up with it. It was inspired, but we like to travel. We go to national parks. It's like our definitely a hobby and a pastime of ours. And it just reminds her of, I think, nature settings where you would find ferns, which is probably why she knows that is not one.
That's there you go. One other thing I wanted to ask you is that you kind of you're an all-in guy, right?
Sure.
Yes. And you mentioned that with your plane, right? Is that you said, hey, I could rent these planes. I don't know how they're maintained. I don't know where all the buttons exactly are, and so you decided kind of go whole hog and just bite the bullet, buy a plane.
Yeah, that was it's part safety, part convenience, right? But the safety part is if you like, I own it, so I know when it's maintained. Like right now, it's in for its annual inspection. I know those things are getting done the way they should be. All the controls are left the way that they were. Plus, each plane is unique, right? They all have different controls, even though they do a lot of the basic same stuff. You don't want to be in a situation like icing in the mountains in Vermont at nighttime and be second guessing where the thing is that you need to do to solve that problem. And so for me, it was that sort of consistency, knowing the machine itself. And I mean, look, let's be honest, right? There's a lot of danger involved in aviation if you're not trained and not doing it correctly. And so I just thought it was worth the money. I think of it like insurance to get something that's going to be consistent.
Almost remove a couple of the risk, remove some of the risk out of the the equation for you.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else in where that translated into, where you would translate that into business, where you said, hey, you know what, no one else in my industry has bought this particular tool? I know that I've made some moves like that where I've said, okay, you know what, I know this might sound crazy, but I'm going to make this investment. We've made some investments in people ahead of certain business.
Yeah.
Is there anything like with a tool or with a person or with a process or any other type of investment like that plane where you've done it in work where you said, hey, I'm gonna do this to reduce risk or put me at a definitive advantage or anything like that?
At least locally, I tend to take on the projects that other people won't or are scared of. But it's never from a position of, let's see how this goes. Maybe we'll get lucky. It's always a very considered look at the financials, figure out the plan, make it make sense. So I think the reason I'm able to do those kinds of projects is because I see things and opportunities, probably by virtue of my experience and education at this point, that other people just don't see. Even though they're there for anybody to look at, but that's just not, that's probably why I find myself in that situation. Also, because I'm from like a smaller area, south suburb Detroit, I'm not competing against the big players, right? I'm not in downtown Detroit.
You used a terminology with me. Was it hyper local?
Yeah.
Is that part of the kind of the major focus that for you would maybe reduce some risk, put you in the catbird seat?
I think it's more just happenstance of where I am in my life and career, right? Like there hasn't been a need yet to branch out for growth purposes. There was enough low-hanging fruit to get us to this point within a 10 or 15-mile radius of where I am. I see the future a little bit differently. And so you talk about, back to your question, investing in things that other people might not. We're a small real estate company that I think tends to think like a big one. We use, we're very data-driven. That is definitely top-down. I insist on it. But I don't like to make decisions based on gut instinct or emotion or anything like that at all. For me, it comes down to data research. Does this make sense? And so investing in tools, there's something called the Cycle Monitor put out by a guy named Dr. Glenn Muller out of University of Denver. And they teach this at Harvard. I went to their online I took real estate finance classes there. But anyway, this is what they teach. And it uses long-term average occupancy compared to current occupancy to track property of different cycles through the market, and it does it in 54 cities across the country, like 54 of the largest cities. It comes out every quarter. I read it every quarter. I highly recommend anybody interested in real estate get familiar with it because it's a really good predictive tool. But there doesn't exist something like that for a more local market outside of those 54 cities and those asset classes that are covered in there. The same principles apply, but there's not a database that puts all that together in an easy to digest way. So we're starting to use AI and tools like that to develop those kinds of tools, for example, for ourselves, for our own investments and then for any other investments we might branch off into as we expand
Wow.
geographically.
Any other areas where you're using technology or AI to kind of better yourself or put yourself in a different position?
Our technology, aside from what I just told you about, is, I guess, fairly traditional. I mean, everything's, like property service or management platforms we use, like cloud-based. Like it's all computer, it's all data-driven. But I don't have we're more brick and mortar than anything else.
Okay.
Right? Our typical thing is find some dilapidated property, fix it up, and then manage it afterwards. Rent it out, lease it, fix it when it breaks, that kind of stuff.
But not necessarily flip and sell. So you're typically to develop and manage.
Yeah, well, and again, I go to data on that. So no, I do sell, but I don't often buy with the intent of selling. Paul from this business group, a guy that Matt and I both know, gave a speech recently called Private Equity Playbook, and he said this term. It was the first time I'd heard it, but I liked it. And he was talking about often private equity will have an investment thesis, and it is their exit strategy in 5 years or whatever, basically what they're going to do. And that's exactly how I tend to look at properties. It's almost never buy, fix it up, sell, make a buck. Instead, it's what can this become, and then if I decide to sell something, it becomes a return on equity proposition, which just basically means if, after you've finished a property, you'll have some amount of equity in it, and holding it, you'll get some kind of return. So you have a return against that equity. If I have some other opportunity somewhere else where I can get, a lot better return by selling, taking that equity, putting it elsewhere, then I might, if I need it as a funding source. So that's,
okay. So the thesis typically never is buy, fix, sell.
Yeah, not for us, no. Yeah.
Okay, great. What else? Anything else you want to talk about? Anything else you want to ask me?
What made you decide to start a podcast?
Well, I've told the story plenty of times, but I'll tell it again. No problem. You must not watch the podcast enough to know.
I have, but apparently not that part of it.
No, just teasing you. I just one day I was sitting at lunch at a really nice place, and I looked across the table and I said, "Oh my gosh, I get to sit with some amazing people just as part of my kids think I go out to breakfast and lunch professionally, for a living, right? And so I needed to show them that I can do something else.
Yeah.
That's why I have this. But it was I'm sitting across from this guy and I'm going, oh my gosh, I get to learn so many interesting things about so many interesting people, and very often, my MO is always I'm trying to create value for other people. So. Because I know that it will come back to me, and that's from an old Zig Ziglar line. You help enough people get what they want, and you'll help enough people in the world get what they want, and you'll get what you want. And so, I always look at going into a meeting and saying, okay, who can I introduce this person to, right? Who in my I don't like to be I tend to be a name dropper because I know a lot of people, but I don't mean to be. What I'm really trying to do is figure out who should I introduce this person to, and so I thought to myself, often I'm just introducing you to one or two people. If I did this in a forum that was a little bit more scalable, like video and through podcasts and all the platforms, is why don't we do this where I have a chance to introduce you to more people, get some great brand association with you. Some of the people I know will want to meet you. Some of the people that you know will want to meet me. And it's a pretty simple equation. I know Joe Rogan is shaken in his boots. He is very, very concerned that the One Plant podcast here will take him down. But we didn't go into this thinking it was going to be a money making endeavor. It was more of an additional value that we could provide, and good things will come from it.
I don't care what my wife says. I think we should continue to call that a fern.
I agree.
I love that, and I think you never know where the next connection is going to come from in life. Socially, you never know who's going to help you with something, or who might just be a good friend or whatever. But it's just by virtue of getting out there or having a podcast or doing something like this, you build connections that ultimately do lead somewhere. I think it's a pretty cool reason to start something like this, and no doubt it'll have a positive impact. So it's
great.
awesome.
Yeah, I've always found that it's definitely not what you know, it's who you know, and obviously building trust and providing value, and that started early in my life, but it got really cemented with one of my mentors and friends, Paul Glantz from Imagine Theaters.
Okay.
He was one of our first larger customers at our company, and the trust that he had put into me very early on, because of the relationship that kind of brought us together and how we knew each other, was just remarkable to me. And so I try to I try to do the same thing that he taught me, and that is to kind of trust first. To kind of say everybody has an opportunity to screw me over at least once. And so I trust quickly, but I give trust and get trust pretty quickly. So that kind of flows right into this podcast as well.
That's a great lesson.
Thanks. Well, thanks for being here. This has been our first named episode, where we're going to call it from bikes to buildings with Ron Thomas. So thanks, Ron, and you're an interesting guy, and I appreciate your being part of this.
Thanks for having me on. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Appreciate it.